Hey guys, Greg Chaplin here, physical therapist and strength conditioning specialist. And in this video, we're going to talk about 25 ways to prolong chronic pain. This is going to be a presentation about how to reduce interference, noise, fatigue. We're going to think about this in multiple ways, but we're going to cover the frameworks first and give you a broad overview of the overall ideas here. And then we're going to go through 25 concrete examples. And my hope is that by the end of this video, you'll understand a bunch of actions that you might be taking or a bunch of thoughts and beliefs that you might currently have that are actually holding you back from making progress. And then at the very end, we just have a very short list of things that you should be doing that you might not be. So we'll cover those as well. But the idea here is we're going to take things off your plate and help you to make progress by doing that rather than just adding more things in. So let's go ahead and jump right in. So here's a question. What's more important to your progress, what you do or what you don't do? And like we mentioned, we're going to cover both of these, but we're going to have a heavy emphasis on focusing on the downsides of what you might be doing, which includes what you think and what you believe. And then at the end, we'll finish up with what you might not be doing that might be beneficial. But oftentimes we're thinking about what can we do to improve, what can we do to optimize, but we don't consider that there is a cost associated with anything that we're doing. Right? So we're going to think of this as an equation. And there are two ways to think of it. We have stimulus to fatigue as a ratio or signal to noise. So whatever makes more sense to you is fine. In the context of weightlifting, right? If we're trying to grow the muscle, and that's our goal, and we're doing bench press, right? We have a certain amount of stimulus on the muscle, and then there's a certain amount of fatigue cost that's associated with that. When fatigue starts to become so much, relative to the stimulus we actually get kind of on the opposite side of a bell curve. So if you imagine in the very middle of that bell curve, we have optimal stimulus and an optimal amount of fatigue, some, right? But then as we go further and further and we start going on the backside of that bell curve, we actually have maybe good stimulus, but the fatigue is accumulating so much that the overall net effect of what we're doing is going down. So maybe we get no additional muscle gain, but we are accumulating a lot more fatigue, which means we can't recover for the next session, right? And then at a certain point, if we really push that stimulus even further, the fatigue cost can get so high that it actually might take away from our goal of improving muscle. So that's just one example. We can think of the same thing in terms of signal and noise. So imagine if you're turning the volume up on something and there's a tiny little bit of noise in that signal. Now, as you turn it up, that noise might start to come up so it's present and you can hear it. As you start to hear it, the actual sound of that signal becomes less and less pleasing. So as a ratio, it might actually sound better to turn it down because the noise is going to be a little bit less. So same thing goes for the process of healing from chronic pain, but just let's look at the math here. So which of these is better? We have the ratio of 50 over 1 or 100 over 5. And the idea here is that if we're looking at a stimulus to fatigue ratio, 50 over 1 is a stimulus of 50, but a fatigue cost of 1. Whereas this next ratio is 100, so it's twice the stimulus, twice as good of a stimulus, but we're paying 5 times the fatigue cost. Now, I'm not a mathematician here, but if we go back to 4th grade division and we divide 100 by 5, we're going to get 20. If we divide 50 by 1, we're going to get 50. So what do we want? An overall net effect of 50 or an overall net effect of 20? I think we all know what that answer is, but the reason that we're getting 20 in that second example is because we're paying a high fatigue cost, high noise cost, high interference cost. So we're going to first start by looking at how do we decrease that bottom part of the equation here, and we're really thinking about reducing interference. So we have 3 primary forms of interference. We're going to be talking about these not in this order. We'll just put them in a weird order, but we have things that we don't do. So not taking helpful actions. We're going to cover those at the end. But then we have things that we're doing, whether that's action-based, so unhelpful actions. And then we also have things that we believe and that we think, which in some ways are actions, whether we're aware of them or not. But these forms of action or thought or belief actually can cause interference. So if we stop doing these things and we minimize that fatigue cost paid by them, even by forfeiting the stimulus that we expect they provide, oftentimes we come out a net positive. So let's go ahead and start off by talking a little bit about beliefs and associated thoughts, and you'll see that this list is actually quite long. So change these. That's the goal here. Okay? Change them. Beliefs and thoughts in no particular order. Let's just go through them and I'll talk about each, taking one at a time. So first of all, never address psychological factors. So have the belief that pain is 100% completely physical and you never need to address psychological factors. Now, even if your pain started structurally, we know that in chronic pain, there's a number of other factors that start to act as an amplifier to attach suffering to that pain. So pain is actually mediated by the lateral pathway of the brain. The medial pathway of the brain is what's associated with suffering. And in chronic pain, we have this turning up of that suffering part of the pathway in addition to that normal signal. So that signal itself is not really the problem. It's actually the amplification that happens by this other pathway. Then we have descending inhibitory control, which basically turns down that pain signal, and that often gets a little bit weaker. But a lot of what contributes to the activity of these pathways are the psychosocial factors of anxiety, depression, catastrophization, looping thoughts, and our underlying beliefs. So a lot of these things can be mediated just by beginning to look at the psychological side, even if that's not how it started. Okay? So there's nothing wrong with you. This is all normal stuff. But a lot of us believe that, well, it's physical. It started physical, so physical is how we're going to fix it. Not always true. Kind of playing off that, structural damage is the cause of pain. So oftentimes pain could start with structural damage, could start insidiously, just out of nowhere, or it could start in a stressful situation. But whether or not it started with structural damage or not, we just kind of talked about how some of these other pathways and some of these other factors can turn up pain or filter it in certain ways. And that's what we see when things become chronic. So if we believe structural damage is the cause of pain, that's going to inform the way that we're framing it. And if we don't have success with these physical-based kind of tools and we ignore those psychosocial factors, then we're going to oftentimes be kind of pushing up against a wall, creating a whole lot of fatigue, whole lot of noise, and a whole lot of interference. Third here, the body is a problem to be solved. So a lot of us have this belief that pain is something bad. Pain is not something bad. It's actually a signal that your body is sending you to alert you to the fact that there's some perceived threat at the level of the brain. So this is not a bad thing, but it's your body trying to get your attention, right? And so a lot of times when we're looking at the body as a problem to be solved, we're basically telling the body to shut up, and the body then just yells louder, hey, listen to me. We're perceiving a threat here. So the way that we look at the body and the way that we address the body from a relational standpoint has a large impact on controlling the balance between those pathways. So we want to work with the body and listen to it, not against it. Cool. On to number 4. This is playing off this similar theme. So thinking that there's a perfect exercise kind of goes along with number 2 and number 1. So if we're always searching for that perfect exercise, then we're going to go from kind of one thing to the next, to the next, to the next. And with that task switching, there's a ton of energy that's wasted. And so the amount of fatigue that accumulates from this kind of jumping from one thing to the next, getting your hopes up, trying something works for a little bit, then it doesn't work anymore. It's what I call the novelty seeking cycle, where we're always kind of trying something new because of our underlying belief that there's a perfect exercise. Well, the amount of fatigue that's accumulated in that process is so massive relative to the minuscule differences that will happen between certain exercise variations that it's completely not worth it. Number 5 here, expecting your family and friends to get it. Most of the time, they're not going to get it. A lot of the underlying psychosocial issues that come up with chronic pain are related to attachment, so our ability to form bonds with others. A lot of times when we're interacting with family and friends and they don't get it, we can actually get triggered with symptoms. So the more we hope that they get it and we're holding out, until they understand us, oftentimes we're just going to be disappointed and actually start to provoke symptoms in many cases. So we need to let that go. Oftentimes you need to kind of break up with your family and friends. Not that you can't see them, but sometimes it's helpful to just let go of that belief system and that social context around some of those beliefs and thoughts that might be actually creating interference. So that's a hard one, but they're probably not going to get it. So if you stop expecting them to get it, you're going to get a lot of that energy back. Number 6 here, expecting that flare-ups won't happen. So this is actually very unrealistic in the process of healing from chronic pain, because as you're going through, you're going to be getting exposures. And these exposures are going to start to increase your tolerance, right? But sometimes they can be a type of exposure where it goes past your current capacity. So you're always trying to push that ceiling up a little bit and raise the floor up of what your capacity is to tolerate certain activities, movements, social context, etc. But sometimes you're just going to go past that threshold and you're going to get a flare up. And oftentimes you might not even know why that is. But if you expect this kind of linear progression and then this happens, a lot of times there's a lot of suffering that goes along with that, because then you get caught up in your stories, and you can start to go into number 7, which is to catastrophize when these flare-ups do happen. So this catastrophization and these looping thoughts create a tremendous amount of psychological and systemic fatigue, which then, of course, lowers your capacity and threshold to symptoms. So 6 and 7 kind of go together here. You need to expect that flare-ups are going to happen, so that when they do happen, you can take a different approach and say, oh, okay, this is expected. How do I deal with this skillfully? Then that in and of itself becomes a skill. You get better and better at handling flare-ups. Then your brain perceives a flare-up as less threatening, and then over time, they're actually going to happen less frequently and to an intensity that's less as well. Okay, number 8, compare yourself to everyone else. So I'll spare you the big psychological, spiritual kind of talk here. But comparing yourself to everyone else is essentially the work of the ego. The ego is a part of you that wants to nourish and protect. Oftentimes in chronic pain, we actually perceive that our mental processes around pain are actually like a physical body. And so those ego functions get attached to that. And when that thought process of I'm in this diagnosis, I'm in this pain, when that gets threatened, that can actually produce symptoms. So a way to strengthen that machinery is by constantly comparing yourself to everyone else. Oh my God, I'm in pain. Everyone else is having a great life, right? This kind of strengthens all these underlying belief structures. So yeah, don't do that. Number 9 kind of goes with number 8, which is developing an identity around your condition. So the more you feel that you are identical to the pain, the more that healing itself becomes a threat to that identity. So it really is in your best interest not to identify with your condition, but instead just to understand that this is a normal human response, and it's your job to learn how to work with the body to get along in this healing process. You don't want to identify with it, or else you're going to tend to stay stuck in that I am a person with pain, or I am my pain, right? Not helpful. Going along with that, number 10, so believing you need a diagnosis. And this often plays into having friends and family and colleagues and people you know not understand what you're going through, because you believe if you have a diagnosis, then you're validated in this and it's real. You have to understand that symptoms are always real, regardless of if they have a structural cause or not, regardless if anything comes up on imaging. This is a real body response and you are feeling real symptoms, but a diagnosis doesn't make that any more real. But what a diagnosis does is it can get you into that identity that we talked about in point 9. It can get you into your stories and actually prevent you from moving forward and learning how to work with your body, and instead be in this state of, well, I am this, right? And be defined by it. So you definitely don't want to do that. Number 11 here, last item on this, and then we're going to move on. Believe you need to feel completely better before progressing your exercises. So this kind of goes with expecting flare-ups won't happen. It's that we expect this linear progression of we can perfectly go from this to this to this to this, no flare-ups. We expect kind of a line that goes up like this, but it's actually like this oscillating thing where we have this overall up and down, like feeling better sometimes, worse, better, worse, but then over time, the line of best fit is hopefully in an upward trajectory. So that means that sometimes you're going to do exercises, you're not going to feel ready for them, but you're going to get an exposure. Sometimes it's going to be good, sometimes it's not going to be as good. And it's your job to start to try to adjust that so the exposure and the probability of a good exposure is getting better and better over time. But yeah, you don't need to feel completely better before you're doing more advanced exercises. It's actually in the exposure itself that you're going to start to signal to your nervous system that it's safe, and then that's going to get you better. Okay, now we have unhelpful actions. So stop doing these. These are in no particular order, and some of these obviously are easier than others. So unhelpful actions here, work at a job you hate. This is a significant source of stress for a lot of people. There is a lot more that we could talk about with regards to this, but if you're at a job and every time you're going to go into work, you start to feel a visceral negative reaction in your body, and you interact with people where you're constantly being triggered into your pain and symptomology, that's probably not the best fit for you. And if you know that you hate it and you're still in it, I think you got some questions to ask there. Obviously, there's other responsibilities and considerations here, so this is not an easy one. But I'll just tell you personally, when I left a job that I wasn't satisfied with, the overall level of symptoms in my body basically reduced by about 60% overnight. Now, with that being said, with this one, oftentimes if it's an interrelational issue and you're having trouble relating with people, and maybe you're expecting that people do it your way and they're not doing it your way, and you're putting yourself kind of on a pedestal relative to them, then there's some internal psychological things to work through there that are not necessarily going to change just by getting a new job. Okay, a lot more to say on that, but let's move on. Number 2 here, maintain unhealthy relationships. So this kind of goes hand in hand with number 1, but it also extends to your interpersonal and familial relationships. We kind of touched on this before, but if you know that you have codependent relationship dynamics with someone, or there's somebody who's abusive to you emotionally or otherwise, and you're maintaining those for any reason, obviously this is not easy to stop, but it's not going to be helpful to you. The overall benefit you get from that social interaction is going to be highly negated by everything that gets triggered and all the fatigue and interference and noise that is accumulated by doing that. Number 3, develop a phone addiction. So I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that you didn't have one before. You might have, but developing a phone addiction just leads us into that trap of needing to research what's going on with us all the time, staying constantly occupied, spiking dopamine too frequently, which then lowers the baseline of dopamine. We're going to be on social media comparing ourselves to others, activating that ego. We're going to tend to find communities of people who are also experiencing the same thing. And if that is identification with a diagnosis, that's also going to be interference. So there's a lot of downsides to phone addiction. Phone before bed is going to be bright light, which is going to mess up circadian rhythm. So there's a lot of reasons not to be on your phone. If you're on your phone all the time, you're probably not tuning into your body signals all that frequently. And often in chronic pain, you have a difficulty in tuning into your body signals. So it just becomes another excuse not to strengthen that skill. So if you take the phone away, you're kind of forced to develop that skill, and a lot of those other influences go away. So phone is pretty bad. Number 4, self-medicate. So alcohol, weed, other non-prescribed drugs, or other forms of addiction, not good. Again, for a lot of the same reasons, dopamine, avoiding presence in the body. Don't do it. Number 5, this one's really big. Working with 10 different providers, then blaming them for your lack of progress. It's you, not them. If you've seen 10 different people and nobody's been able to help you, right? Sorry, I was there, so I can say that. Yeah, it's not about a magic approach or special solution or that person that has the special sauce. It's really about working together to develop strategies that work for you and then applying those strategies over time. So if you're in that trying to find the perfect person, trying to blame someone, then you're probably not looking enough at your own contribution there. Number 6, staying up super late or on the phone before bed. This one, pretty well known. It's the bright light right before bed, especially in that blue wavelength kind of spectrum that can disrupt the circadian rhythm, and then bad sleep means not good recovery. So don't do that. Number 7, obsessing about your body all day, constant self-adjustments and monitoring. So this is a tough one. I was at the point of being so uncomfortable that I'd constantly be adjusting myself and monitoring my body to make sure it was feeling good. But the way I was paying attention to it was in this obsessive kind of hawk-like, intense kind of watching. It wasn't in this gentle, open, connecting kind of way with the body. So all those constant self-adjustments and all that monitoring then becomes a pattern, and we're actually expending so much energy on doing that the marginal benefit we get in maybe being a little bit more comfortable after an adjustment is far outweighed by the fatigue of constantly having to apply our mental bandwidth to that. So not a very good ratio there. Number 8, trying to address it all on your own. So oftentimes if we've had those bad experiences with multiple providers or we haven't gotten better, then we think the only way for us to get better is for us to do it on our own. But often this is just an unwillingness to let other people help you, or an unwillingness to change your beliefs or thoughts around what's actually contributing to pain. So sometimes if you address a lot of the bullets in that first category, then you can learn that, okay, it's actually okay to ask for help. And the way that you're going to get that help doesn't have to always be on your terms. You can also be open to someone who's got some experience in this, actually telling you the best way for that relationship to occur. Okay, number 9 is saying no to all social interactions in self-isolation. So a lot of people have this idea, similar to what we talked about in that first section, of once I feel better or once I have this, then I can start interacting in this again. But this is kind of a road to nowhere because our social interactions actually help us to co-regulate, and that helps our nervous system to be better balanced. And that better balance actually can help us heal from some of these chronic symptoms. So that self-isolation is actually more likely to backfire on us than it is to help us. So this is kind of a funny one. It's like saying no to something. Is that really an action? Well, if somebody's reaching out to you and it's like, no, 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 right? Then yeah. But it could also just be not taking the action to reach out to other people. So this can kind of go either way. And leading into this third category, last one, only 5 or 6 bullet points here, which is not taking helpful action. So you want to start doing these. Number 1, never meditate. So meditation is an incredibly powerful way to get in touch with your body and your experience, what you're experiencing from a sensation perspective, just moment to moment with thoughts and feelings that are coming up. And the ability to recognize those then allows you to, over time, become better at restoring a balance within your nervous system there without any need for any other intervention. So meditation, super powerful. I'm going to go into all the spiritual aspects of that, which are also helpful in terms of meaning and belief systems and all that, but just the act of being with the body, super powerful. Similar to this is never getting morning sunlight. So getting morning sunlight allows you to get grounded, but there's also a physiological factor that helps produce melatonin from receptors in your eyes, receiving that red frequency of light. And then what happens is later at night, that's actually released. But if you don't build that in the morning, then it's not there to be released. You'll have trouble kind of falling asleep. So if you want to start that cycle of better sleep, getting daily morning sunlight is a great way to do that. 3, never get more than 6 hours of sleep. So there's a lot of sleep hygiene things that come into play here. So not being on the phone, not staying up too late, getting more than 6 hours, like just having the opportunity window there be big enough, that's big. But yeah, if you have the right opportunity, you're doing all the sleep hygiene stuff and you still don't get more than 6 hours of sleep because there's some insomnia or something like that going on, that's understandable, right? And you're going to try to make that better with maybe getting some more physical activity, get some more of those positive social interactions during the day, changing some of the other things. But you at least want to have the opportunity to get that high quality and quantity of sleep. So that's really huge. Number 4, don't get enough calories. A lot of people are under eating, right? Especially they start exercising as a way to bring themselves along in this chronic pain journey, but they don't eat enough as they're doing it, and they'll accumulate too much fatigue because they can't recover because they don't have enough energy. So track your calories a couple of days, MyFitnessPal, measure your food. Yeah, it sucks. But if you do it, you'll have a good idea of what you get. And you might be surprised that a lot of the body dysregulation you're having could just come down to not eating enough, right? And don't get obsessed about like, well, how much protein should I have? And how much of this should I have? And how much, like, what kind of, special kind of foods should I have and avoid, and supplements and all that? It's like, are you getting enough calories? Do you even know how much you eat? Okay, number 5, never progress your exercises. So you get kind of a set of exercises, restorative, often floor-based things, and you're like, oh, these feel pretty good. These make me feel pretty good. I don't want to disrupt that, so I'm not going to progress these. But then you get to a point where you're very fragile and you don't build resilience. So we know that building resilience is actually what helps chronic pain more than anything. So yeah, it's okay to have a collection of exercises that make you feel better, but don't try to stay in that little protected, fragile bubble. Instead, progress those exercises using some of maybe the same biomechanical themes. And then over time, you'll add some resilience within those patterns. And then you can get rid of those other exercises that are more of the relief-based. And you can actually find that you feel better with things that are your normal gym activities. You'll feel much more kind of normal and like other people when that's happening. You'll feel like you have an ability to participate in a normal sort of a life. And that's going to give you confidence and connection with others that often you're lacking when you're in this chronic pain kind of a journey. All right, last but not least is never sticking to a program. So a lot of people, when they're going between those providers, it's because you kind of half-ass your programs, you don't stick to it, or that program doesn't get progressed because you're not making each individual step, right? And so sometimes you just need to have faith, even if things are not seemingly working or going fast enough. If you stick to that program and apply the principles of exercise over time, you will heal. And if you apply also a lot of those beliefs and mindset shifts and thought-based things that we talked about in those first 10 bullet points, then you're going to be able to stick to that program without needing that really quick fix and all that sort of stuff. So hopefully that helps. Homework here is to choose 1 to 2 items from each of the lists, each category, and then write a concrete action plan for a couple of these items to change them. And then within the next day, take action on at least one of these 1 to 2 items, right? Could be from each list or just total. But what you want to start doing is start to realize, what are you doing that's actually getting in your way, producing more noise, interference, and fatigue? And you take those off of your plate. So you're doing less. You can often get more out of what you're already doing. And you start doing this systematically to all of these bullet points. Next thing you know, it's like, oh, you're feeling way, way better. And you're not giving more of your time, mental bandwidth, or otherwise your energy away. And instead, you're actually doing less to get more. So you can leave this presentation with this mantra, which is the less I try, the better I feel, right? Try that one on. Okay, that one does it for this one. Hopefully, you can avoid doing all these things or not doing them, add in some of those helpful actions, and you'll be feeling a whole lot better. Peace.